And we are live. Hi.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of Trans Talks. I am your usual host, Sammie James, and I am so excited to have another conversation with one of our trans faves. Please welcome Acacia, the intimacy coordinator.
Hi.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to talk to you, learn about this field that you work in. The first thing I ask people is for you to introduce yourself a little bit more. I specifically ask, what words do you use to describe yourself?
Yes.
And that can be identity wise, but it can also be a literal description of yourself. It can be your interests. That can be you can interpret that however you like. And after you answer that, you are welcome to give any further intro that you want to give the people.
Okay, cool. So, like you said, my name is Acacia. I use they or they pronouns. And I think my favorite way to describe myself would be a manic pixie dream queer. I don't know if you've heard of the manic pixie dream girl, but I'm that in a non binary form.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for me, that means using they pronouns and they pronouns. I'm very artsy. That's why I love being an intimacy coordinator. Is I get to work in the film industry, which is my
Mhm.
passion. But I have a lot of different arts interests, and I love flitting from project to project. Probably as a result of my ADHD. um, and other ways I identify as queer. That's something that's really important to me. I'm both non-binary and trans, but I am also a bisexual. And so just really enjoying all the rainbow colors. Although I'm not really a rainbow person. I'm, I think, I don't know if you've heard it, like, there's like three different ways queers tend to dress. And one of them is a time traveler who doesn't quite care if they fit in. And that would definitely be my.
I'm into that. Yeah, I saw a meme once that it was specifically bisexual girls, and one of the options was barbecue dad but sexy, and I'm just like, oh
Um,
my god, how they whoa they skewered me.
yes, love it. And I was so blessed. I actually went to like a transiversary party last night, which was so fun and full of the queer community. And there were definitely people with that aesthetic there. Yes.
Yeah. It's just like so many what is it with queer people in pineapple shirts?
I mean, what's not to love about a pineapple shirt? That's the question.
Fair. I say that as someone who owns three. So like, I'm not, no shade, just
Yeah.
ah.
And
So
then a bit more about me generally. Like I said, I'm an intimacy coordinator, which means I work choreographing sex and intimacy and nudity in film and television. And that's a really fun job. It's got a lot of mental health and social justice aspects to it, as well as a lot of creative outlets. And that's like my true passion. I'm excited to share a little bit more about it today. Yeah.
yeah, awesome. I was going to ask you to give like just a basic definition of the job, but you did that in your intro.
Yeah.
Um, but how did you get into that?
That's
Is
it is a complicated
mhm,
but also surprisingly simple story. I have always been interested in telling stories about gender and sexuality ever since I hit puberty. Like
mhm,
that's what I wrote about. That's what I wanted to direct about. That's what I studied in school. I was an international studies major with a focus on women and queer studies and anti-colonial history. And then at the same time, I always knew I wanted to go into film. I thought I wanted to be a director and, direct stories about gender and sexuality. And then um, I discovered intimacy coordinating. And at the same time I was doing all this, I was also a burlesque dancer and a
Okay. Cool.
choreographer and teacher. And so I was already performing sex and sexuality on stage and learning how to strip and learning how to choreograph and learning, what looks good when you're kissing someone. And then I found out this was a job and I was like, "Oh my god, this is it. This is perfect because
Mhm.
it's everything I'm passionate about and I get to do it every single day and I love it."
Mhm. Yeah, and there are a couple questions I have for you. I'm just kind of trying to pick like what the order for them. But I also want to go in the order of like this is one that I feel like I know the answer to this. Like the answer is yes. I'm going to assume. But as far as your job, have you found um that before working with you that a lot of the sets the people that you work with are in a very come into that with a very binary mindset it-
I Yes and no.
okay.
It really just depends on the person. And
Mhm.
I would say I am particularly blessed because I focus so heavily on LGBTQ cinema that I get to work on productions that are already thinking about this without
Okay.
ever being
Yeah.
there. Um,
Okay, that
yeah, and so I get to collaborate with like a lot of people who are making LGBTQ films, in which case, I think surprisingly, where the binary shows up the most is in the sex scenes, because these people are actively thinking about how to deconstruct roles with the characters in general. But when it comes to intimacy, people don't necessarily have the most experience putting it on the screen. And they often fall back to, okay, well, what have I seen on screen before? And the reality is, there's not good representation on screen yet.
yeah, yeah.
And so a lot of my job is to come in and say, okay, like I see what you're trying to accomplish, but maybe there's ways to tell this story in a way that's more authentic and more interesting and more diverse.
Awesome. And if you're not cool like giving like actual examples for this question, like I totally get that. So I'll ask the question two ways. What um movies or TV shows do you think have done intimacy coordinating well and not well, but also just the B version of that question? It's like what do you think are like do's and don'ts of showing intimacy? Um
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely kind of two separate questions, and I'd be happy to answer them both, actually. I'll start with the
oh, okay. I
was what have I seen that I think is done well? Some of my favorite intimacy to watch on screen is Sense8. I don't know if you've seen it. It's awesome for queer
oh
representation.
yeah.
There's a polyamorous couple, there's a queer couple, there's a trans character, and it's directed by the Wachowski sisters, who are trans.
Mhm.
Um, and they did not actually use an intimacy coordinator. That came out before intimacy coordinators really came onto the scene. It's a very, very new position. Came up with the Me Too movement. And the first show to ever use one was actually season 2 of The Deuce on HBO.
Okay.
So really recent. But I love the intimacy in that because I think we don't get to see, well, for one, polyamory on screen is really rare, especially getting to see that in like a sexual context, especially not in the form of comedy, because
Yeah.
oftentimes parody is the first representation we get. And when we can move into the subjects of drama, I think we can get a lot more in depth, and more realistic depictions. So that's something that I love watching. Like I said, they didn't use an IC, but I actually know someone a dear friend of mine, Christina Valentine, who's another intimacy coordinator, who worked with one of the main actors in Sense8, not on Sense8, but on a new horror film. And, maybe they'll tell the Wachowski sisters, and we'll see that in their next production.
Nice.
And then what was your second question? Can you
it was kind of like what do you think are do's and don'ts of or like misconceptions that people I think might be a better way to ask it, like misconceptions people may have of like, well, this is how we do intimacy.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of cliches, which I feel the need to rail against a bit, particularly sex under the sheet or sex under the blankets, which is like, I think, the go-to in cinema, because it's an easy way to be like, oh, they're doing something that's implied, but we can't actually see the actors. And a lot of times, I think it's very sloppy filmmaking, honestly, because it has nothing to do with the characters or what they would be doing based on who they are, but instead is just about really a lack of choreography, because a lot of times before intimacy coordinators came onto the scene, they would just throw the actors in without a pre-rehearsal and just say, okay, well, you can do the intimacy scene now. And of course, you're not going to know what to do and how to work with the camera in a way that makes it so we're telling a story, that we're seeing what looks like real intimacy, while still remaining within the actor's boundaries and making sure that they're comfortable in the way they're being depicted and that we're seeing the body parts that they feel comfortable showing. And so a lot of my job is about like, okay, well, if we're going to choreograph this in a way where maybe we do see that, in theory they look naked, but we're just seeing their back or their side. How are we going to do that in a way that looks completely real, but is still, for one, using intimacy barriers and modesty guidance? An intimacy barrier is either a garment or another physical piece of equipment that not only protects from sensation, but also protects the exchange of like fluids. So you're protecting actors from STI transmission, as well as like saying you're not actually having sex with this person. It's acting, and you're not going to have to be dealing with, maybe someone gets an erection during the scene. It's not like uncommon, but that way you're protected from that.
Okay, cool.
So that, and I guess one of the common misconceptions, that's more on like the filmmaker side, but on like the, muggle side, like, I think a lot of people misunderstand what it is I do, and they think I work on porn, which I don't work on porn. I work exclusively on simulated sex scenes. So everything you're seeing, even though it looks real, is fake. And a lot of people don't realize that, especially because, honestly, I'm an awesome choreographer at it. You can't tell.
Yeah. And so because intimacy means a lot of things, but it also, it is it means a lot of things, but to a lot of people it means one thing. And you described your job a little bit. You've answered some questions. You've probably already talked about if this is the case or not. But do you work primarily or exclusively with sex scenes, or are there other aspects of either your personal work as an intimacy coordinator or in the career field in general?
This is a wonderful question. Thank you. I specifically mostly work on sex scenes. That is because of my background in burlesque, as well as I've worked as a sex worker before. So in my repertoire is like a lot of, okay, this is how we're going to make a sex scene. Intimacy coordinators in general do not just work on sex scenes. They work on anything with physical or emotional intimacy or nudity.
Yeah.
So that can be a doctor's exam. It can be giving birth. It can be intimacy, like familial intimacy, especially between a minor and an adult. You should always have an intimacy coordinator there for that who specializes in working with children. Um, Underwater intimacy. I don't think there's anyone currently doing that, but I cannot wait to see the day when like that's something.
Oh.
And I imagine, there's so I'm talking about intimacy coordinators, which work in film, television, and digital media.
Mm-hmm.
There are other intimacy professionals that work in theater, that work in
Mm-hmm.
opera, that work in dance. I imagine modeling as well as reality television will
Yeah.
eventually get intimacy professionals as well. So there's a lot of different areas and ways you can work on intimacy coordinator, and it's very much about what your background and interest is and what you bring to the job. But there's sort of basics that every intimacy coordinator should know. That includes consent and boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Not only should we understand them, but we should be able to teach them and help people articulate their own, even if they have no experience doing so before. You need to have a mental health aid certification. A lot of our job is basically being stewards of people's mental health and
Mm-hmm.
ensuring that they're in a place where they can perform. So if someone has a trauma response, and that's something we should also understand is trauma and
Yeah.
somatic responses, we need to be able to work with that person and help them articulate what they're going through, help them, sort of reach more of a median in what they're experiencing, or have the strength to go to the director, the AD, the producer, and say, okay, well, we can't shoot this anymore today. Or we need to change the choreography because they've decided they're not comfortable with this.
Mm-hmm.
Or, on the opposite end, I've had days where they push the intimacy scenes till the very last, and the day runs long, and then we don't have enough time, and we have to condense and say, okay, well, we need to completely rethink this scene last minute, but how are we going to do that within your boundaries? And so choreography, like I've been saying, is huge. And some other things, understanding race, gender,
Mm-hmm.
sexuality, disability, these are all super
Yeah.
important. Oftentimes there's no one on set thinking about this. And when you're putting people into a scene of intimacy or a scene that is emotionally vulnerable in any way, um, understanding power dynamics and
Mm-hmm.
how those are at play in the room, and understanding the way in which people's identities might impact their experience, their ability to voice their experience is really, really, really important. So that's something that I spend a lot of time studying and talking about
Mm-hmm.
and thinking about as well.
Yeah, awesome. So as a chronically ill and disabled person, that's something that I think about. I pass as able-bodied, so I don't have to think about it as much as other disabled people. Um, but so I'm trying to like best word the question, and you know what, maybe there don't have to be answers that come to you, but what are some examples that you think movies, TV shows that you think have done that type of intimacy coordinating well?
There's one that particularly comes to mind. It's called Sex Education.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and in I don't know if it's season 2 or 3, but
that's three.
yeah, 3. They have a physically disabled character, and there is beautiful, consensual
Oh yeah.
scene with this disabled person. And I know they had an intimacy coordinator on that. That whole show has used intimacy coordinators, which is awesome. And I feel like you can really tell when you watch it
Hmm.
because the intimacy is so much more diverse, so much
Yeah.
more interesting to watch, and it's fun. You can tell the actors are having fun with it too.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and that show, because like I'm a trans person, I'm a chronically ill person, and like I've seen, like a lot of us, whether they uh relate to my personal experience or not, I've seen so many examples in TV and movies of, intimacy involving members of my communities where I'm just like, that, watching that show, there were two times specifically in this third season, where like I was ready to be like, ah! And I'm just like, oh, like that and the intimacy with the non-binary character. I was just like, oh, well, this is actually okay.
Yeah.
But I was so ready to be like,
And honestly, I think it's a lot of people with, more marginalized identities such as queer, trans, global majority members, etc. I think it can be difficult to watch and enjoy television and movies a lot of times because we're not represented at all, or the representation is like traumatizing, honestly.
yeah.
Um, and it's really sad because we don't get to enjoy media as much as people who aren't constantly recognizing that they're not there.
Yeah. Now this question is just for me, and it's also like, listen, I know the answer is no. The answer should be yes. The answer should be yes, and like I, because it really, I where my job is primarily stand up comedian. Uh, and my question is, please, are there intimacy coordinators for stand-up comedy bits? Because there should be. There aren't. There should People should have to consult one before they tell some of their jokes.
There, so an intimacy coordinator specifically works on like staging things, but there are people, and myself included, who do consultations. Like I do gender consultations.
Mhm.
There are people who do cultural competency consultations. Like you can really get in
Yeah,
consult with anything. And
yeah,
if you're telling a joke about something and you want it to engage that audience instead of offending them, checking in with someone who does that work is probably going to really
yeah,
improve your set.
yeah. Yeah, and and like after I said that, I'm just like, oh, like stand up, sure, but like, oh, there are absolutely, I'm gonna assume have to absolutely be intimacy coordinators who work in sketch comedy.
Oh, yeah.
Like that's a thing.
Yes. And actually, intimacy and improv is a very specific field of study, because a lot of the work then goes into establishing boundaries beforehand and then working within those, but also finding ways to signal within the scene without alerting the audience that, okay, I need to do something different, or this isn't okay with me, or actually, I am okay with this, and let's go further. And so being able to work that in very naturally is definitely something that intimacy professionals talk about.
Awesome. Cool. So how do you think that your trans and non-binary identity has informed your work as an intimacy coordinator?
Um, that's an interesting question. And it definitely does. It's kind of complex in the way
Yeah.
it is, and multifaceted. I think, like in a very like more hands-on sense, like how it affects how I do my job.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a lot about deconstructing preconceived notions of like, for instance, we have like stereotypes of like tops and bottoms and what that looks like and who that is.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so a lot of my work is about, okay, well, let's actually look at the character and then evaluate based on them what is realistic for them to do in the bedroom. And so I think that's very fun. And a lot of times I often surprise directors and actors in that I guide them through these exercises to talk about it. It's not something I come in and I'm like, okay, well, this is how we should do it. I very much like want it to be a conversation and say, okay, these are things I'm noticing. And if we talk about them, what comes up? And oftentimes we'll end up with a scene that looks very different from what was originally in the script, but everyone agrees is like so much better and so much more important to the story that we're telling.
Mm-hmm.
So
Awesome.
yeah, I think that's one way in which being trans informs that. But also, I think there's a certain amount of trust I get
Yeah.
because I'm non-binary, because I'm female presenting as a non-binary person. Also, I think it would be different if I was, assigned male at birth, and I think that would affect people's perception of me. Unfortunately, I don't think it's fair that it does. But I think people can trust me a little bit more because I'm sort of coming from the bottom, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking to me about this today. We are at 26 minutes, so I want to make sure that we get into the conversations that I have every week on this show, and talk about you outside of your work. So, question I ask every week. This is one of my favorite questions. Uh, what gives you gender euphoria?
This mustache. It's new. I'm trying the mustache for the first time the past couple weeks. So that's fun for me. Also the like filters on like Instagram and like other platforms. I mostly use Instagram, but I know they're everywhere.
Mhm.
That will like, make you transform genders. And I think apps like that get a lot of shit because they're like, it's not real. But for people who their actual body doesn't necessarily reflect how they
Yeah,
feel in real life, huge gender euphoria. And I'm a huge fan.
awesome. Uh, Now this question, it has been a favorite of people on this show to answer because we all have an answer. What cis nonsense are you sick of?
Um, I mean, obviously being misgendered all the time, just walking in and people assuming I'm a girl, it's really frustrating. And I think as a personal practice, I always try to use gender neutral pronouns for people if I don't
Mhm.
know their pronouns. And I wish
Yeah.
that was something that would trickle out into broader society. What else am I sick of? No, I think that's the biggest thing. I don't know. Honestly, I hang out with like the queer community so much that often I don't have to deal with a ton of cis nonsense, which is why like my biggest like challenge is just like public interactions.
Yeah.
So it's just so nice to be in a community that's gender affirming and like I don't know, I don't have to like go through my day every day being like, oh, the shit drives me crazy.
Yeah. So on to some just fun. I like to call these nonsense questions, in the best sense of the word. Um, but what would you say are your comfort food, comfort movie, and comfort music?
Comfort food, spaghetti bolognese. Um, my whole life. That's hasn't changed. Um, my comfort movie, I'm gonna go with Pride and Prejudice, the like 2006 version with Keira Knightley.
All right. Yeah.
Um, such a good movie. Beautiful cinematography, but also the chemistry.
Mhm.
Even though there's like there might be one kiss at the very last scene, but there's no kisses. But the chemistry is better than like the majority of movies where they're having actual sex scenes, I swear. Um, and what was the last question?
Comfort music.
Comfort music. I like love acoustic type music. I love oldies. I grew up listening to my dad's music, so like classic rock, classic pop.
Mhm.
Um, like I think ultimate favorite song would be "Cats in the Cradle" by Harry Chapin,
Nice.
and then also "Landslide" by Fleetwood Mac.
Cool. Cool. Great. Great answers. So, what is your favorite animal?
Animal. Oh, lately I'm feeling the octopus.
Nice.
Yeah, they're just they have such a unique intelligence. Like we as humans don't really understand them, but they're so smart and they've, got that color changing quality that as
Mhm.
a non-binary sort of gender fluid, gender queer person, I very much value.
Nice. What is your favorite color?
Color, green or blue?
Nice.
Yeah.
What shade of green?
Um, it varies. Very like definitely like natural shades, like the type of colors you'd see in the forest.
Nice. Awesome. Uh, what? Uh, listen, this I love this question. It's gotten a variety of reactions on this show. What is your favorite smell?
Cut grass.
See, it's like everyone has an answer. Like it's like you might have to. It makes you realize that about yourself. It's just like, oh, I do have a favorite smell.
Yeah, it makes me think of summer and, just exploring and being a kid, I guess, in like the
Awesome.
best way.
hmm and final question I ask on this show: who are some trans people that you think are doing good work right now? This can be in any field. It can be the arts, activism, whatever.
Um, Great question. I've got like a couple answers that come to mind. I guess for like the most public sphere, I'm really excited about all the work Elliot Page has been doing. Um, I I think it's very brave to transition in such a public way, and I think that's like a story that's being covered very positively. And I've actually I know the PR agent who is helping with all that, and they are like very into LGBTQ issues and like like their clients are a lot of LGBTQ people. So I think that's really shown in the way it's been covered. And as a non-binary and trans person, it gives me a lot of hope that we can see that in the media.
Yeah, awesome. And final thing, Acacia, thank you so much for talking to me today. Please tell people where they can find you, how they can support you, social media, whatever you want to um, tell people.
Yeah,
Take
absolutely.
it
So
away.
there are a couple different ways you can find me personally. I'm very active on Instagram. I have a page called Intimacy Coordinating. And on that, I put out a lot of educational materials about intimacy coordinating, about working on scenes of intimacy, nudity, sex, etc. And that's really geared towards anyone working in the arts. So if that is something you're interested in learning about at all, I highly recommend following. I also have a website. It's called acacia.gay. And I put blog posts out on that. There's also a ton of information about me, a ton of information about intimacy coordinating, as well as, resources for intimacy coordinators. And I actually provide free consults. I also do like gender consultations and stuff. So if that's something you're interested in, check it out. I'm happy to talk to you. I have an email. It's intimacycoordinating@gmail.com, same as my Instagram.
Mhm.
And then as far as like ways to support, I mean, besides supporting me directly and reaching out and like, suggesting me for
Yeah.
projects, I have a film that I worked on that will be coming out hopefully sometime this year that I'm super excited about. It's called Perfectly Good Moment. And that's a feature. We'll see where it shows, but you can find out more information about that on my website. And then also a short that I worked on called The Robosexual. And if you're into LGBTQ media, I highly suggest checking this out. They actually had a short that came out before this one called Friend of Sophia. It's by Alden Peter. If you can check it out, it's incredible. It's about a futuristic world where everyone is in like gay or lesbian relationships, and actually it's outlawed to be in a relationship with a robot. So very fun.
All right. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. This was great. And thank you everyone for watching. We will be back next week with another wonderful conversation with one of our trans faves. But until then, take care of your